Well, let me go to my guest, Manju Seth, who's also a former Indian diplomat. Manju Seth, when you see the aspect of China and Russia, of course, we see those global tensions being played out, as Ambassador Muni had also put it out. But when it comes to China and Russia, is it because of India's independent foreign policy, not being associated with any camps, that could have probably been one of the reasons why we were able to get them around?
That is one of the reasons, of course, that Russia, because with Russia we've had a very long-standing relationship. You must remember that they have, during very tough times, Russia stood by us, and we've had a very defense and economic relationship with them for many years. Of course, recently there has been some problems in the relationship, but not really. And even during the Ukraine war, India did not take any sides, and we stood firm. But of course, the Prime Minister did convey to President Putin that this is not the era of war and that peace should be found. And even now, that message is being conveyed again and again. And I think that in the wording that has been put, if you look at the words that have been now put on the Ukraine war, Russia, India convinced everyone not to be sensitive to Russia's concerns, which did not want Russia to be mentioned. Whereas everything else has been put there, including saying that territorial integrity and no one should, unilaterally try and, so it applies to everybody. So it was a general statement. But of course, with the context of Ukraine. But that apart, I think because Russia has understood India's position, and the President Putin didn't come. He spoke to our Prime Minister and conveyed his inability to come. I think that was a very positive sign where he personally called up and said that I'm unable to, whatever the reasons were. He has explained it personally, I think, and that was a very good gesture. And with all the other countries, we have very good relationships, including, of course, as you mentioned, not belonging to any camps. We have been practicing strategic autonomy, and that has been appreciated because other countries also many of the other countries would also like to be in that space where they can practice strategic autonomy, which would be in the best interest of that individual country. So that is also another reason that India was able, I think, to negotiate this. And of course, I must again commend all our diplomats and whoever was involved in the formulation. It is a very, very well worded, very well rounded statement, which I think nobody could really have had an objection to. So that also is a plus point. And India's relationship with each of the countries, each of the G20 members is very good. And now including with the AU, as you mentioned. So it is really a kind of, should I say, diplomatic win also for India. But overall, I think it's a very good
Situation that we are in fact seeing. Ambassador Ezemuni, we were also speaking about China. China has its own ambitions. China believed that it should be the ascent of China first and then any other nation within Asia. But there is also the factor that though we have engagement with China, we have that kind of tensions building up with us. India has those tensions in the borders with China. But at the same time, there is some kind of a partnership that is also going on, a very kind of uneasy partnership on the economic front. But at the same time, it is still there. And diplomatically also, India's rise is seen with concern in Beijing as well. Coming to the future, of course, you have actually rightly raised those questions of how China was trying to raise questions at each and every step. But coming to the future, how much of G20 might become relevant if, or whether G20 will still relevant in the future if there's a possibility of China walking out?
Well, we have had what the kind of relationship which we have had with China is the kind of relationship most of the other countries have with China. China has a problem in terms of its what you call the ambitious expansionist mood on the one hand, and secondly, the China is also the factory of the world. So everybody wants to trade, everybody wants to have economic relations. They have a lot of money to spend around. BRI is just one example. Therefore, not only India, but US, most of the Asian countries, everyone has this kind of a dilemma to engage with China economically and distance itself from China strategically. Now, where this will lead us to, I don't know. much would depend upon the Chinese behavior. If they don't change their behavior, I think the strategic distance will continue to grow. And therefore, people would start talking of, dislocation or discontinuation with China's relationship. We tried that. Americans tried that. Some of the European countries are now trying. Even some of the Asian countries are now sick of the way that burden has been imposed upon them in one way or the other. So it is very difficult to say how this really would proceed. But as I said, much would depend upon China. And I think this G20 must give a lesson to China that, hey, hello, behave. If you don't, you will get isolated. Here, China could not say anything because the world did not want this kind of obstruction to continue in one way or the other. May I add one more point which you and Ambassador Manju said have been discussing?
Sure, sure,
And that
sure.
is about how this consensus came about. Yes, we are all heads off to Indian diplomacy. And as I said earlier, I am with everybody else who is praising some of our, nimble-footed diplomats who have done almost everything else. But there is another point which you must take into account, and that is the situation in Ukraine in terms of ground realities of the war. There are two aspects of it. One, there are no indications, absolutely no indications that Russia is going to retreat in one way or the other, which the Americans and the Europeans have been expecting and trying to do that. Not only that, I think some of the American intelligence agencies have told the president that this idea of, cornering Russia and battering it and pushing Putin out is not relevant. It's not going to happen, despite some of the CIA earlier reports and assessments or whatever else it is. Secondly, this grain deal and the Black Sea is causing a lot of problems in Europe, a lot of problems in Asia and other parts of the world. And Russia has given a very clear message that either my way or highway, so far as the grain deal is concerned. And they are all concerned about it. Therefore, that has helped moderate the American position, European position, that we must condemn Russia, we must isolate Russia. And this is where I think the credit or the key point goes to the softening of the Western position on what should be written on Ukraine war in this consensus agreement. And they had to withdraw. I'm sure Prime Minister Modi's personal diplomacy during dinner with President Biden must have worked in one way or the other. But this is something which has been going on for days. And therefore, the critical aspect is that the US had mellowed down, the Europeans have mellowed down as to what kind of an expression should go on Ukraine war. And that's, in a way, is an accommodation, I would say, of the Russian position that we should not be named as an aggressor. The rest of it is acceptable because they accepted even during the United Nations. So while we talk about Indian diplomacy, one of the reasons for the success of Indian diplomacy was the changing ground situation, ground reality in the Ukraine war.